information is subject to change. I think that was left over from the last panel, actually. I won't bore you with a load of details on me, but briefly, I'm a local singer and a musician across a few styles. I've run labels, been an agent, run music development projects at music conferences abroad. And I got involved with Love Music, Hate Racism when Joe Cox was murdered, and have run a series of gigs around the town ever since. So it's great that Kirklees have backed. This is my second suggestion for a collaborative panel around the Love Music, Hate Racism theme. The first one, the touring of the EU panel with Tracy Brabin, Carry On Touring and the Musicians Union went down really well. And you can rewind that by the council's...
I'll go whatever. If you, it probably makes more sense for me to go first.
Yeah. We can go that way. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah, we could intro Rick. I was going to say we have Rick Blackman, author of Babylon's Burning: Music, Subcultures, and Anti-Fascism in Britain, which is described as an absolutely essential read for anybody aligned to the anti-fascist movement. More than that, it is a vital and overdue portrait of youth tribes active inside the 20th and the 21st century struggle against systemic Western racism. Give it up for Rick.
Thank you. Right, well, first, before I say anything else, I'd just like to congratulate Huddersfield on putting a record shop right by the station. Right? And there's nothing that makes you happier when you can come out and buy a Winston's album, an Alice Clark and a U-Boy album. So I've just contributed 60 quid to the local Huddersfield economy. So someone could buy me a drink afterwards for that, I think. But anyway, joking aside, hands of somebody else other than the people who I think actually were responsible for defeating the far right whenever they grow. So it was either Thatcher in '79, it was unfavourable media coverage with Nick Griffin, it was a cold winter in 1962, it was with Lord Rothschild's withdrawing the support from Mosley in the 30s. Every time that fascism rose in this country and got defeated in this country, it was to do with something else, according to most observers. So I started to get a little bit annoyed about that. And the other thing that I noticed as well was almost all the people that were writing about this stuff were middle class. And now I've got no problem with middle class people fighting fascism whatsoever. You know, these working class white people and black and Asian people in the 60s and in the 1970s and through to the present day. So I thought that needed adjusting. So the book does three things really. So it looks at how music has been utilised, because that's the real purpose of the book. It's how music has been utilised to organise against racism and organise specifically against the far right over the last 70 years, and what form that's taken. Also, inside that, what role subcultures have played in that, and to some extent, Britain is a sort of unique place for subcultures. It's not to say that other countries don't have them, and they certainly do now. But a post-war phenomena, really, that really happens quite uniquely in England, or certainly in the scale that it happens, is unique to Britain, and that goes through from Teddy Boys, you know, in 1950, 49, 1950, all the way through the 50s to mods in the 60s, and skinheads and hippies, and then punk and reggae, casuals, and a whole long list, goths, and a whole long list of different Idiot-led Alliance and the EDL in recent years. How those subcultures have been utilised by both the far right and from our side as well, on the anti-fascist and anti-racist side, and how and looking at how subcultures music have come together to combat the growth of the far right. So that's the premise. That's the premise of the book. Now, to try and condense all of this into 10 minutes is going to be very difficult. So I'll go for it, because there's a couple of things that I think hopefully you'll find interesting. So what the book does is it gives the social, political, and economic backdrop to the rise of a particular fascist organisation, three in particular, and then it goes. That's the chapter that precedes each chapter that's about these three musical organisations. So there's one. The first organisation was an organisation called the Occasion Murdering of black people in West London by armed, not armed with guns, but armed with weapons, but young men, predominantly Teddy Boys, but also orchestrated behind the scenes by Oswald Mosley and Colin Jordan, two of the leading fascists who were active in Britain at that particular time. So the first organisation is Stars Campaign for Interracial Friendship. Second organisation is Rock Against Racism, which people will be more familiar with, formed in 1976. Against the backdrop of a massive growth in votes and activity of the National Front, and also of the more paramilitary and more violent British movement as well, and the joining together of mainly punk and reggae bands, but much more on top of that as well. And then the final organisation is what we can see all around us, is Love Music, Hate Racism, formed in 2002. Again, against the backdrop of a large growth in support for the British National Party and Nick Griffin. So it looks at the three organisations particularly active, not so much nationwide, but certainly around West London. So the first thing that I noticed when I was doing the research for this, and the Stars Campaign for Interracial Friendship, or SCIF, as they were called, is the remarkable similarities with Rock Against Racism, what happened 20 years later from that. So after the riots and the August Bank Holiday of 1993, Littleton, Cleo Lane, Tubby Hayes, Tommy Steele, Lonnie Donegan, so the sort of pop and the skiffle world and the jazz world combined together, but also celebrities as well. So some quite surprising names, to be perfectly honest with you, like Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe, and a whole bunch of actors that got involved, and the thing mushroomed as well. So this was the first. This came out in the Melody Maker the day after the riots subsided in West London, and it was a call for any like-minded people, musicians or celebrities, anyone who was concerned about the racism of the riots, to contact the Melody Maker, and then to start looking at building a campaign and building groups to oppose the racism and oppose Mosley, who'd been active in it. And then subsequently what happened there was mainly in Notting Hill, was a localised when you consider America's record for integrated lunches in 1958 wasn't particularly up there. So supported by the local council, but this was a SCIF initiative. This had been organised by musicians. Second thing they did was they formed a club called the Harmony Club in West London in beginnings of 1959, and the purpose of it, the sole purpose was it just so that young black kids and young white kids could dance together. That was, you know, and to talk to each other rather than be any animosity on the streets, you know. So the whole idea was to get people together, and, you know, God forbid they might get off of each other as well. So there was a real deliberate attempt to get that social interaction going. And then they put on a series of clubs in Soho, and in Paddington and all around sort of West and Central London, that deliberately, openly defined the colour bar, because although it wasn't legalised, they would care about the colour bar. We want people to assemble together and play music together, and bands to play together, and people to dance together, etc., etc. So this lasted for throughout 1959. A guy called Zak Cochrane, who was an Antiguan guy, was walking home near Portobello one night and was attacked by 4 white guys and was murdered, which the police denied had any levels of racism inside it. And then subsequently the campaign picked up again, and Mosley stood in the 59 election in North Kensington as an open fascist, and I haven't got time to go further. In the book, you see there's election leaflets that he says, and the whole emphasis of his election campaign is against repatriation of black and Asian people, and an end to housing there. And like I say, mass leafleting campaigns, arguing politically, and they produce 2 broadsheets as well. Frank Sinatra writes a 2-page article for their magazine. Sinatra was very active, albeit from America, but was a supporter and part of this campaign. Paul Robeson as well was involved in it, and very importantly, Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones, who was really the mother of Carnival, was a Trinidadian woman who migrated with her parents to America, but got kicked out in the McCarthyite witch hunts, ends up living in England and becomes active around the Communist Party. And it was her idea, alongside, she was a SCIF member as well. The first Notting Hill Carnival was actually in King's Cross Town Hall in 1959 in January, an indoor English going abroad. So Mosley pisses off after he loses the election, really. And then the reason for SCIF being an organisation disappears because there's no longer a fascist threat. So that's the first instance of what happens. I've got time. Then the 60s happen, and things are better, but not fantastic. I haven't got time to go into any detail, but then the second organisation, which you'll be more familiar with, Rock Against Racism, happens with a very slow build-up that starts to become a real massive problem in 74, 75, with the National Front polling massively in local and in national elections, and becoming a lot more confident and violent on the streets. And there's sort of murmurings all around the country of sort of small anti-fascist groups that are happening spontaneously, but not under any sort of like umbrella organisation itself, which we later see with the Anti-Nazi League. But Rock Against Racism. So Rock Against Racism, again, bizarrely, after Eric Clapton, and again, I've got pretty much the whole context of what Clapton said, but there's another letter condemning Clapton's violence, and again, calling for people who are like-minded, who are against the racism and against the violence, to write back to the melody maker, to form an organisation, to form a group where we can start to combat racism. So all the time, without knowing about SCIF, right, none of these people knew about what had happened in the 50s. So it's just a spontaneous organising against racism that followed the exact same trajectory as SCIF had done in 1958 and 59, but the difference between Rock Against Racism that is noticeable is it spread. It was massive, and there really wasn't a part of the country that wasn't touched by it in some way. Almost every town and every city had some form of night, whether it was again spontaneously. Really, the idea was, because punk hadn't really properly happened in 76 when Rock Against Racism was formed. It's still, it's very much still in sort of Soho and around Covent Garden. It hadn't hit the news in the way that it did. So the first bands were sort of like soul bands, sort of pub rock bands, really. But then when punk hits, almost simultaneously with a sort of like really big growth, certainly in London, of reggae bands playing it seemed the obvious thing to do for the people around the sort of steering committee of Rock Against Racism to have black bands and white bands on together, and then to start to stage gigs, but to provocatively stage gigs in places where the National Front are big. We're not just going to play in like comfortable suburbs where it's all leafy. We're going to take the fight to where, because we want to talk to the kids who have been poisoned by these ideas of the NF, and it all seems so logical now. Right, when we look back and we say, well, then this happened, and then we had a few gigs. And then let's have a carnival, and then the carnival happened, and there was 100,000 people at Hackney in April 1978, and it was a resounding success with the Clash and Steel Pulse. And it all seems like, because it all fits chronologically now, but these were decisions that were made and experiences that were had that said, well, why don't we try this? Let's do this. So it was all. It wasn't written down. It had to be sort of thought out beforehand and chanced, really, and experimented. And Red Saunders and Roger Huddle, who were two of the the letter writers in the first place, said they were absolutely terrified at the carnival because they thought, if they were lucky, maybe like 6,000 or 7,000 people would turn up, and then just these coaches after coaches, and the demonstration that started in Trafalgar Square that marched 6 miles from Trafalgar Square to Hackney where the carnival was. I mean, I'm sure we've all been on demos before, and we rarely walk 6 miles, and we don't want to walk 6 miles for good reason. So, and there was a lot of criticism by saying, well, people only went for the music, but there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people that went on the demonstration as well. So it was that combination of music and politics that were used, and were a fundamental tool in how the NF were ultimately beaten, and they lost pretty much all their deposits in the 1979 election where Thatcher won. Okay, very quickly, because I'm running out of time here. So I love music, hate racism. Where we to suits, I mean crap suits, I have to say, right? But suits nevertheless, thinking that they're going to look more respectable. And to a certain extent, this had worked to an extent with Jean-Marie Le Pen in France, and was clearly a movement to get away from that street fighting thuggery image, and it worked to a certain extent. So at the backs of this growth in support for the BNP, Love Music Hate Racism was launched in 2002 and modelled directly on Rock Against Racism. So to use young black and white artists, but now the thing had changed. So the carnival, the 30th anniversary carnival in 2008, again in Hackney, the first real mass event, although there had been some stadium gigs the real essence of where we are with Love Music Hate Racism, I think, and where I sort of conclude this in the book is that now, if there's a threat from the far right, or now if there's a threat with racism, and certainly the racism from the police force especially against young drill and grime black kids in London, which Zak I know is going to talk about, is that we don't have to. We've already pre-built to a certain extent. We don't have to have the arguments that people had in 1958 about there shouldn't be a colour bar, that we can go to clubs together and we can dance together. That argument's been done. We've won that. The arguments that we had with Rock Against Racism and against the NF in the 70s equally be won. We can have black and white bands on stage. We can even have bands that are made up of black and white people now. So all of these arguments, all of these things that we had to overcome, these obstacles we had to overcome in the past, now have gone. That's not to say that we should rest on our laurels, or it's not difficult, but we are in such a much better position now in terms of fighting fascism and racism, and the experience we have of all of these organisations that have used music to fight against racism, that when we do see the threat appearing, we're better equipped we've got to start, we've got a good start this time that we haven't had before. So really, the last thing I'll say is what this book is just, although it's a serious political book and it's a serious analysis of how we use culture, and in particular music, to defeat fascism and to organise against fascism, ultimately, in all of its multicultural and subcultural forms, it's a celebration of how wonderful our side is and how fantastic it is that we can go to gigs and listen to all of the music and experience the different things that we have that those arseholes on the right don't have, because they haven't got the same richness of culture and diversity we have. So ultimately the book is about that. So thank you very much.
Goes on, we're trying to go around the country right away running up to the summer because as you might know from what Rick said, LMHR was formed in 2002, so it's the 20th year anniversary in June. We want to celebrate that fact and continue to build for the challenges today. I want to, firstly to plug again Rick's book. It's a fantastic book. It's important history that we need to understand on how we were effective last time and how we can continue that going forward. And I want to carry on talking about LMHR, but then look at some of the questions that we face today, both in terms of tackling racism and in the music industry as well. So, as Rick mentioned, LMHR was formed 2 decades ago. If you remember the early 2000s, Nick Griffin and the BNP were winding things up, remember, in the northwest, in cities like Oldham and Burnley, following the riots, trying to organise and to build a base. They were becoming a threat electorally again in 2002 in places like Oldham and Burnley. So LMHR was a mix of anti-racist campaigners, music professionals, musicians. Later on, the kind of trade union and student movement got involved with the campaign as well, but very much drawing on Rock Against Racism's legacy of trying to pull different groups of people together through mutual interest in music, and also the legacy that goes through the tradition that Rick talked about in the books of understanding that music and culture are not something separate to politics. Actually, cultural politics is absolutely crucial. In looking at 70s with Rock Against Racism, the questions of race and racism were the battleground. Was cultural politics. So LMHR in the early 2000s was continuing a very proud tradition. And as Rick said, reggae and punk had long been gone since the 1970s in terms of being the key genres of music in the early 2000s. Now we had grime music and we had indie music, bands like the Libertines, Kasabian, the Kooks, a number of other bands. At the time, grime artists were struggling to get booked. Venues, opportunity for Roll Deep, who joined us actually on the stage in London just at the March Against Racism on the Saturday, just gone, played outside of Parliament Square. You can check that on our socials. But Roll Deep, probably the first grime crew, and a number of other artists that have gone on to be very, very successful artists like Kano, like Chipmunk, performed for Love Music, Hate Racism at the time. On occasion, when the police did raise the question of grime artists performing, Rick talked about this cross-pollination of punk and reggae. Well, in the early 2000s, it was grime and indie, it was grindy. The way round of it to say, no, they're not grime bands, they're grindy bands that are performing, and you'd put them on stage, grime and indie artists together in the early 2000s. So some of the successes going towards the British National Party, and embarking as well. You remember Nick Griffin tried to get elected against Margaret Hodge. It was a very, very dangerous place at the time in terms of the far right trying to organise, embark in and intimidate anyone who would try and stand up against them. Love Music, Hate Racism went round to schools, took musicians into schools to warn against the British National Party, to expose them as being a far right party, and to cut through this supposed respectability of them being in a suit. So it was absolutely crucial. Now, the key thing I want to turn to is, as Rick said, one of the parallels of these movements is there have been movements that have grown to confront the threat of the far right and fascism. So you had trying to organise for the second time in the 50s, as Rick talked about, the 70s with the National Front, and then the early 2000s with the British National Party. What we saw towards the second decade in the 21st century, a lot of these far-right organisations, thankfully, were in decline. We didn't have the sort of scale of far-right threat. But what we do have, and what we continue to have now, which is the ongoing importance of Love Music, Hate Racism, is the questions of institutional racism that we're facing today. We don't have the scale of far-right party, but actually the mainstream politics, the level of racism that we see in mainstream politics, and the breeding ground that creates for the far right is a huge question for campaigns like Love Music, Hate Racism to address. And did this come out any more than during the pandemic and during the horrific scenes we saw in America with George Floyd brutally killed in America, that raised so many questions in our own society about questions of racism? We saw the fantastic Black Lives Matter movement, the biggest movement in this country since the abolitionist biggest anti-racist movement since the abolitionist movement in this country. In over 260 towns and cities took part in protests or actions as part of the Black Lives Matter. Yet, still, the questions of institutional racism absolutely remain. And what happened? What was a lightning rod that followed the death of George Floyd? Was it created a bit of an earthquake in the music industry? We saw people who previously felt powerless to raise these issues in work, or when they did put their head above the parapet, faced repression in the workplace, actually gain the confidence to raise the questions of racism and discrimination that they were facing. I want to talk about a few years ago we were involved in a campaign called The Beautiful Resistance that you'll see on the posters. We worked with some of the leading labels in Britain and internationally to get their artists to support Love Music, Hate Racism, to make anti-racism through the Black Lives Matter movement on the streets, that gave people confidence in the workplace to raise these issues and make sure that as a music industry that these kind of issues were addressed. That I think is absolutely positive, and it's a work in progress, shall we say, holding people's feet to the fire that questions of racism continue to be addressed within the music industry and not the swept under the carpet. I mentioned grime a minute ago in the sense of the early 2000s. Now grime once struggled, to be played in clubs anywhere or to be shown on the TV. Now we see artists like Stormzy and Dave, some of the biggest selling artists in Britain now. It's very much gone mainstream. I suppose the genre we could say that's took grime's place in terms of some of the repression is drill music, a music that comes from trap music, from has its roots from trap music in Chicago. Drill music has very much taken grime's place. In 2018, a drill group called 1011 Crew had all their music pulled down from YouTube and were banned from making any new content. You can watch this on iPlayer. There's a program about a massive drill artist called Digga D. As part of conspiracy to commit violence charge, he has to notify the police 24 hours before releasing any new music and provide them with the lyrics to review before he can put his music out, or he risks breaching parole conditions. Artists Skendo and AM, while performing in London in December 2019, were given a suspended sentence for performing one of their tracks called Attempted 1.0. It's the first time in British legal history that someone's received a sentence, suspended or not, for the music they've put out. So this is happening in 2022, and let's be clear, no one condones violence in music, but we have to understand where this comes from. Music is an expression of people's lived experience. People talk about how people talk about their experiences in their music, and should absolutely have the right to. And I just want to quote one of a drill artist, because I think he makes this point really well. This was a few years ago, a point that Abracadabra made when he said, "Targeting musicians is a distraction. The cuts that affect schools, youth clubs, social housing and benefits are making life harder for the average person living on or below the poverty line in this city. There are people doing mad things not because they want, but because the situation has forced them to." Now, the Music Union have campaigned a lot around this, the issue of not denying artists platforms to express themselves. Made this point in the Black Workers Conference. They said, "Music has often been the focus of moral panic to distract from deeper issues in society. Youth violence has long been an issue before drill music. The majority of drill provides an insight into the needs of young people and does not incite incidents of violence. Music and artistic self-expression are a reflection and not a individual socio-economic experience. The government's diversion tactics to continually blame music of black origin as a contribution to the cause of the rise in outcrops of violence or antisocial behaviour demonises young black community and suppresses their voice." And I'd very much agree with that statement. I think music doesn't come about in a vacuum. It reflects people's lived experience. And like grime, the journey grime has gone on, like punk has already been talked about, or reggae. Music goes through a process as well. Wider politicisation in society. You'll often find at times a wider politicisation. This will be reflected in the music. It's notable, actually, the Black Lives Matter demonstration, that a number of drill artists made songs about Black Lives Matter, reflecting what was going on in wider society. So the job, as I see, of Love Music, Hate Racism is certainly to continue to give platforms to artists across genres. We want to bring people together through music, whether that's drill, whether that's grime, whether that's indie, whether that's rock. We have to continue to provide the platform for musicians to perform. And we have to do other things. I think it's absolutely crucial, as the Black Lives Matter movement...
People moaning session, because for me, and I appreciate this might be slightly controversial in this room. I'm kind of tired of us as black people not leading the charge in these sorts of fights. You know, I commend all your research, Rick, and everything that you've done. And I think, I'm sure your book's amazing. But, you know, there's been enough Ricks, you know, who've been talking about this stuff, and not enough people that look like me or Zak that are leading the charge on these things. And when I look around this room, and I see, you know, it's like, you know what I'm saying, right? Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not racism, which, with all due respect, would only affect 4 of us in this room directly, and there's only 4 of us in this room. That's what's disappointing. But on the flip to that, it is encouraging that so many people are here to take up the good fight. That said, not to bring everyone down, I do apologise, but I said to you, Pat, I was always going to be honest about like who I am and what I'm about. But that's what I want the Black Junglist Alliance to be about. It's an organisation of black people getting killed again in the streets and stuff. I'm just tired of being looked at that way, and that's why I started the organisation, because I wanted us to try and at least show and galvanise the next generation of black kids that they can do anything they want. Like, I think political correctness and well-meaning people have introduced certain ideas and ideologies into our narratives. And I think what's happened over time is they've kind of become an excuse for a lack of people looking after her, trying to look up her dress to find out if she actually had a tail, right? Like, it's a true story, it's insane. But yeah, have you heard that one as well? Have you ever heard that one? Yeah, there you go. So, you know, we know all of this stuff. And it's not, and again, it's not to be disparaging to anything you've done, Rick. I don't mean to pick on you. I'm not attacking you. Sorry. But I just, you know, to hip hop and everything else in my sort of early teens, but it developed into a love of jungle. And yes, I indulged in the drugs like most of us did at certain age groups. But what always was left with me was the love of the music. And when I was 18 and 19, that the crowds that were at these events traversed over into fashion and made an incredible fortune there. These are the examples I'd want kids to see in every genre of music. You know, I want to stop them thinking that they can't do things because of systemic racism or what other stuff that gets thrown at them as reasons why they can't excel. Why are we telling our kids they can't excel? I
worked in a very working class large secondary school, and the National Front were building in that area. It was Ashton under Lyne over the hill, and there was an organiser on the estate that fed the school, and kids were coming into school with the most disgusting stuff that they were hearing at home because their parents were being pulled, and I felt it was my duty to do something about that. And what I did, I mean, the thing that all teachers dread is their class assembly. And they're, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I thought, right, you have to put your head over the parapet, and we did an assembly, engage with music.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I think love music has a real role to play in schools. So I'd just like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic because I'm actually having an issue with my son's school currently at the moment. I think the education system is laughable in this country. There's no flexibility for teachers. There's no room for sort of any new ideas or any new originality in terms of what... My son learned about the Great Fire of London 3 years in a row. Why the hell would he need to learn about that? Why? 3 years in a row. 3, 4, 5, and 6. He learned about Great Fire of London. Why? Why? No one could give me an answer. And I'm going into a school and the teachers are... When you feel that you're more intelligent than the teachers, that's a... Successes from the white community from poor working class, and there's been successes from the black community in poor working class, and there's been loads of failures as well. So I just want to sort of galvanise this idea that I mean, I appreciate you say the past is important, but I just feel like for me I just want us to kind of just move on. Like I just don't like the idea that I'm pictured or that my son would be pictured in any particular or different way. And I think that's what some of these ideals do. But nevertheless, I just think that we just need to be teaching and showing examples of, you know, so for example, my son, I remember I had the period of showing him, you know, famous black people from the past, you know, famous black people. So Ed Moses, I'm a huge athletics fan. So showed him Ed Moses. There was a day we were going through old Michael Jackson. It's a fictional place, but Wakanda forever, whatever. You know, like, you know, I want that. I want Queen and Slim. I want Us. I want Get Out. I want the new one, Nope. It's going to be brilliant. You know, I want to see, you know, I want Afropunk. Yeah, I don't know if any of you know that platform. Any of you know that platform? Mm-hmm. No, check it out. It's amazing. It shows people in a beautifully black way. The last Jay-Z album, the 444. Any of you see any of the videos from that album? Any of you? Is there a yes? Did you see any of them? How beautifully were they shot? They brought me to tears. I haven't seen black people depicted in such a beautiful way. Why are we not talking about that shit? That's what I want to talk about. The beauty in what we do, in our art and our creativity. That's what I want to talk about. And it's not to be disparaging to any white person that have done whatever they need to do. You should be proud about what you're doing. I said at the very beginning to keep doing what you're doing. I never said not to do it. I just said I want to talk about the beauty in the what we do. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do.
Of times of a feeling of hopelessness, and actually the music and culture at the times were tools to push people forward, to give them something. People who felt like they had nothing grounding them were tools to push them forward. I hope that we can learn those lessons today, because I think young people need something like that. And just broadly on the questions of contribution throughout hundreds of years in this country. So these are a part. Black agency in this country is a key part of working class history in this country that we should be proud of. That
should be part of the curriculum. We're talking about what we're doing in education. These are things that should be part of the curriculum. You're absolutely right. You know, these are people that have stood up and done something. That's not what I'm being disparaging against. In fact, I'm not being disparaging against anything. To be honest, I don't want to make it seem like I'm being the
You know this whole thing is going to be a backwards and forwards about history now, don't you?
Well, it feels like it's become that, yeah, because I get it. I look, but I get it. Yeah, I get it. History, but I'm just saying, you know, Buck Rogers, you know what I mean? 25th century.
I mean, I think it's important. I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm bored shitless talking about racism, right? So I can't imagine how bored you must be to suffer it, right? I think we have to say that we absolutely support, you know, the pushing forward to be successful, to get black and Asian people into positions and women into positions and to be successful as role models and all the rest of it, right? But we also have to say at the same time that if you look at Baltimore, when it kicked off in Baltimore, and I mean, the American police have killed so many people, I've forgotten the guy's name, who it was, but when you look at what happened in Baltimore seven years ago, all of the campaigns that ran through the 50s and the 60s about getting, you know, black faces into high places, in Baltimore, the chief of police was black, the mayor was black, the leader of the council was black, and the fucking president was black, right? Yet still, there is this like disgusting systemic racism and violence against black people that happens in America. So I think we have to say to kids, 14, it goes back, you know, years and years before that. And what they do is to try and take away all of our history from us and try and fragment it so it doesn't mean anything. Right? And all I'm saying is that we say yes, you know, we want. You know, all the hip-hop guys in the States who've become multi-millionaires, it's fantastic. These are role models for young kids, right, and all the rest of it. But there's still loads of kids in the projects that aren't. We have the Gamble and the Huffs and the Curtis Mayfields and the Berry Gordies from the past, right? You know, hip-hop as a genre, samples, its very definition of music is history.
Sorry, I got to stop you there, because you're talking about millionaires and billionaires. I wasn't talking about millionaires and billionaires.
No, but I'm just adding.
Yeah, okay, because I just think, because not everyone's going to be a millionaire or a billionaire, I just want everyone to feel that they can achieve what they want.
And so do I, but I've got no issue with you saying that, with that progression, but I just think, I think we don't pose it as an either or option. We say, look, you know, we want success, we want role models for young black and Asian.
All these just words, man, and I just feel as though just I just feel as though we're complicating it. There's just so many different things that just get said in regards to issues of race, and really just things need to stop being got said. Like, you know, why do we have a Black History Month? Can anyone tell me in this room why we have one? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I do.
Because you're mentioning those names, my brother, and they should just be part of history, full stop, right? So why do we have one? But right, but has that?
It needs people to take steps, and maybe Black history is not the right step. It is an attempt.
So like Morgan Freeman correctly said, maybe we just need to stop talking and calling it Black history, just looked at it the same way. I think that's the separation is causing the problem. It's just more segregation.
No, because history has been history
Yeah,
for a long time, and we've been written out of it.
I know.
If we were just to leave it as history,
No, I get that.
then
But,
we wouldn't be involved in it. So
but,
yes, at some point, I would hope
yeah,
that in the future there would be just history we would learn.
I could be naive.
It's really nice, but I think it's impossible.
But you see, this is what I'm saying. Again, it's that I just feel as though at this stage, you know, again, you know, I don't know either of you, but you probably both been through your shit, you know. And I'm not to pick out anyone, but we've all had our stuff, right? And I'm like, I don't know about you two, but the word that I heard after George Floyd more than anything was tired. I just heard Black people saying how tired they were, and that's kind of where I'm at 2 years on now. So I feel as though all of this is kind of like a hangover, and it's like, you know, I went into an H&M and it's just like every picture on the wall was black. And it just made me laugh because I was just like, okay, everyone's panicking and just like, you know, like just throwing things up. I don't care. I don't care. Yeah, again, I just think this is another red herring.
Black like myself hears it all the time
Sure.
because it's acceptable in music.
Yeah, exactly.
And some groups just feel that if it's used in music, it can be used in playgrounds.
Yeah.
You know, when you have your cafeteria.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And that really bothers me.
Yeah.
Last thing in terms of education. A few years ago, at a local school, they played roots, they showed roots for
Why?
dramatisation. And my nephew was the only black child in that classroom. And they played it, no warning, nothing. He then faced months of being called into Kinsale,
Exactly.
N-words and blas.
You see what I mean?
What we think we now understand about modern teaching
Yeah.
and how to look after our young people.
What school did that?
I just can't say that.
They need to. That's terrible.
I can't call it out. And they failed to deal with it. And he ended up in schools.
Yeah.
You wonder whether they've learned that lesson or not.
You see, we in the jungle community, we've had an issue with the N word a few times, and the thing with me with that word is that I don't really relate to it I just don't relate to it. You know, my friend tried to tell me it's our word, my black friend. I said, is it? Is it our word? No, we made the best of it. We made chitlins out of it. Yeah, it was what we were called, and we tried to put a spin on it, and then we're calling each other nigger, whatever. Right? Sorry, no disrespect. Not anyone in this room. I know none of you have called anyone a nigger, but I'm just saying it's those other horrible white people. Yeah, it's their word, right? So I'm, you know, but at the same time, I listened to Griselda and Benny the Butcher and rap and all that for years and hear it with impunity. And I think for me, Donald Glover, you know, Childish Gambino, he's got a bit about it because he said the word essentially now for him means nothing. Because if Charlie Sheen famously called Denise Richards, right? I don't know if anyone knows who either of those two people are. Right, so you got Charlie Sheen on one side. This is a telephone conversation. Denise Richards, yeah, she was in, you know, a whole bunch of films, and she's literally the whitest woman in America. Like, seriously. And Charlie Sheen called Denise Richards a nigger in a private phone conversation that was recorded. Right? That just shows I mean, it just means nothing now. Doesn't mean anything. I'm not giving it. The person that hears it gives it the meaning. Because if someone shouts nigger in the street, I'm not turning round because they're not addressing me. Because I don't see a nigger here. So yeah, I don't care about that word. I don't care if little kids in council estates use it. It doesn't bother me. It's just part of the language. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, Devon, yeah. Yeah.
What she's doing now, she's so inspirational. She's going around hundreds of schools and she's talking about her experience.
Mhm.
And she's looking at the curriculum,
Mhm.
decolonising the curriculum.
Yeah.
And I just want to share
That's-
that
that-
inspiration.
What's the name?
Maya Thomas.
Maya Thomas. Okay, cool.
Worked for Peace and Justice Project.
Okay.
And she's involved a lot in
Yeah, and so she's trying to just sort of dismantle that idea of, yeah,
But also, I point out, being a teacher and head teacher for all those years,
right.
that we do need to look at the curriculum.
Yeah.
It's in the fundamental political education and the curriculum for my
I wouldn't want humanities to go from schools. Like, you need to, I'm not saying to not learn about history, but I just think that when we're talked about in history, it's always certain things, and I'm just bored of those things being talked about. I just like to hear some new stories. You know, does anyone know Anansi the spider? Okay. You know, I know it's saying it's dumb, but just, it's such a good, it's like Caribbean Aesop's tales, yeah? They could literally just replace some of the stories with some Anansi the spider shit. Like, wouldn't really be hard. I grew up on them as well. And then, but my mum's from Grenada, so you got Laja Bless and Sokoyon, and all these like sort of stories that, you know, we grew up with as well. But I just think that, you know, if we can learn about Hans Christian Andersen, why couldn't you learn about a Caribbean, you know, folk writer? Like, I just think part of it, but it needs to be in a positive light and not sort of like, you know, it's not done in a sort of really annoying way. But yeah.
It's been covered and all, but when I was at school, I learned about the Tate and Wiley era. Obviously, having been a Trekkie, I
Yeah.
was brought up with the original Star Trek.
I'm saying there was a positive example on TV to be seen. The Cosby Show. How many people used to watch the Cosby Show? Who even A Different World? Do you know that A Different World, which was a spin-off series of the Cosby Show, Pat? Sorry, you're on your phone. But it's a spin-off world where the oldest girl went to university, right, from the Cosby Show. Do you know there was an uptake in college admissions by the black community? Like, some significant uptake. I don't know the percentages, but it was significant because people were seeing the example. Oh shit, I could do that shit. Do you see what I mean? That's what I'm talking about. We're missing all of that. And it's just Top Boy. Again, another story about council estate kids murdering each other. Oh, fantastic. And everyone's going on about it on Facebook, how great it is. And good for Kano and what's his name, and that they're getting work. Fantastic. But why not we, you know, yeah, even Shameless. Yeah, same thing. It's boring. It's funny, but, you know. Yeah.
We have to change the narrative ourselves.
100%.
You coming in and say, let's accentuate the positive.
100%.
Let's demonstrate that we can achieve and that we are beautiful people, you know, whether we're black, working class, but we can do it.
Exactly.
But at the same time, we need to work with allies to get the system changed.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's in delivering health services, education, housing, we need to actually address those fundamentals. And unless we do that, we're always going to have this imbalance.
You see, again, quoting Donald Clark, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm sucking up. If you're looking at business, like white men are brilliant at it, yeah, they're great. So let's take it. I'm saying to black people, let's start thinking like that. Like, let's stop thinking like this. You know, there's nothing wrong with that mindset, but please. It is a joke. It is a joke, by the way. Yeah.
If you think about education, they are taught from basically the moment they can speak here.
Yeah.
They are taught that they are going to be the next generation.
Exactly.
They're going to come
Exactly.
to rule, to dictate,
Yeah.
to manage everything.
That Etonian spirit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's built into their
Yeah.
education system. Not
Ah.
the education system that I went through,
Yeah.
but theirs, and probably if you went to private school, yours as well.
You see, that's the thing.
That's what we need to replicate. We need to instill in our kids the way that my parents instilled in me.
Yeah.
They will succeed.
Yes, mine did. It's ironic about getting to go to a private school. Sorry, Rick, I didn't.
That's all right, carry on.
It's so funny. It's ironic because I actually got to go to Colf's as a school in South East London, and I got to go to Colf's on something called an assisted place, right? And do you know who introduced assisted places into this country? She was mentioned earlier on. It was Thatcher. Thatcher believed that, regardless of where you come from, there should have been. Now, I'm not a Thatcherite. I just want to get that on camera. Just want to make that absolutely clear, right? Because even a broken clock is right twice a day, as they say, right? So regardless of all the other shit, I'm going to give her a little props, just a teeny little 1% little props on assisted place, because I got to go to a school that gave me. I had the opportunity to excel. I'm just more creatively minded, so I wasn't really suited for that environment. That was what was unfortunate about that, much to my parents' disappointment. But but it did give me some skills and tools that I was able to then, use later on in life. So and actually just seeing how people like who you describe live. I went to my friend, I won't mention his name, but I remember going to his house. He's got a tennis court, 2 tennis courts and a swimming pool. Like, that was one of my pals at school. My sister went to Sydenham High. She's got friends that are worth 20, 30 million. So we've sort of seen, well, hold on a minute, that's achievable. Like, this isn't something, and so maybe we found the mortgage, we found my parents' mortgage. It was £4,500 they paid for their house, and it went for close to £1 million. Yeah.
I don't think that level of wealth is anywhere like that up here.
No, but
You may be going to have, you have some.
it kind of, well, it isn't, but the ideas get destroyed. So, like, the partners that existed, like, they kind of got sort of stopped. I don't know what happened. I don't know why, but there was, and so this is where there are issues with history where there have been actions against us mobilising and galvanising, but
They're still in existence.
essentially, yeah. But this is the thing. I think it's a lot harder to. I'm hopeful. Maybe. Yeah.
That's got to change.
Can I butt in after you? Sorry. Carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know what kind of things that you're doing to promote those kind of things. But also, just a question as well. The way the music business is going at the moment, it seems to be becoming more and more dominated by companies and by rich people. If you look at a lot of the artists and things, a lot of them increasingly are coming from private sector education and so on.
Right.
Does that need to change? Do we need to change the kind of organisation of the music business?
You're saying that the biggest stars in music right now are coming from where?
From more wealth, the kind of Ed Sheeran.
I mean, well, Ed Sheeran's like, yeah. I would slightly disagree with that now, because I think that what maybe you're negating is the TikTok era, because it's terrifying. It's scary how powerful some of these TikTok kids are. I haven't even got an account. I'm scared to look at it. Like, do you know what I mean? I just feel I'm just out of the demographic for it. But I think there's a lot of power in that, and there's people that are becoming incredibly famous.
Simultaneously inside the music industry, I think, and I think you're right in terms of the majors. I mean, the music industry doesn't exist in the same way as it did even 30 years ago, right? But the majors are becoming sort of like bigger and bigger and more powerful and more sort of isolated. So there's only really 3 or 4 major companies that are happening in terms of the majors. But simultaneously, what the digital age has done, and it has allowed people to make albums and to make music in their own bedrooms, right, that is studio quality. You don't have to save up thousands of pounds to go into a studio and do a demo or do an album. You can do it over a period of time in your own house. And I think that's the democratisation of music that the digital age has. So, in a myriad different places that, white middle-aged people like me don't get to see, because, my head's back with Curtis Mayfield, right? But these things happen, and they've got millions and millions of hits everywhere. I mean, Zak mentioned Digger D. I mean, 15 million, 20 million hits that happen on a regular basis. So this is happening, like, for young people, young black kids and young white kids together, grime and drill and all the rest of it. But it's below the surface, but there's money being made.
I don't know if it's below the surface, Rick. I think... Sorry, say again?
Is that beginning?
Southwest, when I went for a few years, you know, that was remarkably white as an industry.
Yeah.
Really, on a management label, on an A&R level.
Yeah.
And I used to think, this is ridiculous.
I
And I wasn't
mean-
the only person that noticed
I
that.
mean,
It might have changed in recent years, but certainly a few years ago it was.
I think different people spend their money on different things. I think white people really like festivals. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't wanna,
I'm talking about, where are the managers? It's a bit like football.
I hear you. But again, that's one of the things, just to answer your question though, one of the things we've got set up is a program, educational program called Set Speed, which we're hoping to introduce either digitally or in real world, because the dream would be to have a building to run it from. So we're kind of looking into that. But it could just be a series of online courses, because what we want to do is just, again, just going back to what I was saying before, is if you're in jungle right now, you could be an MC, you could be a DJ, you could be a vocalist, whatever, fine. But if you love it as much as we do, then here's a way that you could stay in it past your career. That's as simple as that. So just introducing the idea that a singer today could be a manager or run an agency or become a promoter, you know, or own a club, or, you know, just open up the ideas that you don't just have to be a rapper or a DJ in the same way.
AstroTurfing effect, where the money comes in. TikTok, prime example. You know, the people that have done well out of TikTok, who were there at the start, it was a grassroots thing, they've kind of made it now.
Yeah.
The people that are probably coming through now are people who have agents, managers,
Yeah.
there's money behind the scenes. So you've seen exactly that same kind of thing that's happened before with technology.
Capitalism.
It's capitalism. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, look, there's always gonna, everyone's look.
Isn't it? So maybe sort of trying to encourage people to go down the, you know, talking about people getting hits, streams, X number of followers on.
Yeah.
Is this actually creating any kind of realistic career for potential music?
Do you know who Jake Paul is?
Influence? Yeah.
Oh, okay, so then yeah, that answers your question. No, but
Is that
look,
era
but-
of YouTube?
no, but it's the same. But it's the same. It's just that the
To sort of discussing influencer culture.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
look,
but-
can I come
Yeah,
back
yeah,
on?
it's all right,
It's
yeah.
linked to your point, Martin. I think you know, the option of avoiding the big label was to go independent, but as you said, the labels very quickly cotton onto this and they create independent distribution. So a lot of these big artists who are independent still have a relationship with the big labels.
Yeah.
They become a gatekeeper of the industry. That and the same, you know, we can talk about Spotify. The labels have huge stake in Spotify. That
Yeah.
unless you're Ed Sheeran, some of the really big artists, often, you know, I mean, there's lots of musicians in the room. What people get is peanuts for the amount of music that's played. So there's a long way to go in that process of democratization, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think because with the NFTs as well, I just think it's given a level of I don't know. Maybe it's just because maybe I'm in jungle. Maybe there's a bit more of a DIY spirit. I don't know, because at the end of the day, Sway was the first person to win, you know, a Music Mercury Award. He was independent when he.
Of course, but I think that's always been the case. I mean, you mentioned NFTs as a good example. That's, again, something where, and crypto, some people have come in, done really well. I know people that, you know, invested a very small amount or got paid for a certain job in crypto and have done really well out of it. However, now we're seeing this thing where, you know...
Elon Musk and banks are all buying crypto.
Always been there to some degree.
Yeah.
You've seen it sort of discussed where there's big companies almost getting advertised and influenced as to actually come in and push NFTs and crypto. And once again, it's kind of left the regular people. You've got to have a significant amount of buy-in, and in a certain way, that's the same with creative arts as well. You've got to have a certain level of buy-in, it seems, where if you want to go to a good music college or a creative arts place.
But that buy-in you're talking about is eyes, right? So you're saying, so I manage a band right now called Free Cell. 2 guys in Israel. Okay, they make incredible music, like Radiohead. They're amazing. And I've been trying to get them signed to, you know, like the Ninja Tunes, the Warps, everything else. Okay, they've all said the same thing to me. They've said, Chris, they've got no clout. So I'm like, but how are they going to get known if you don't sign them? Well, no, because they need the clout before we can sign them. It's just the unfortunate way of the world. Now, they want to be artists in that sense. And I'm saying, look, we need to get a little bit more active on socials and such like. And they're like, oh, but I don't want to have to show them all this stuff. And I said, no, it doesn't have to be anything about your life. It could just be little wanky 30-second clips of art and pictures and, you know, music, whatever. It doesn't have to be anything. But just there needs to be something, because that's what's going to give you the eyes, which is going to give you that buy-in, which then you could then sell an NFT off the back of, or then you can maybe get a deal off the back of. So I think what's great about the technology, and again, just to be slightly more positive, is that, you know, from Kate Tempest, you know, to whoever, Kate Tempest was discovered on YouTube. She's doing a thing in her bedroom, and people went and found her. She generated the audience for herself to the point where no one can really touch her. You know what I mean? She's untouchable.
Those people, but I also think about looking at the music industry. I mean, as you mentioned, we're old now.
Yeah.
You know, we have to think about the music industry as being a sustainable thing.
Sure.
We're sort of still looking at it as this like smash and grab type culture of let's go in,
No.
make your money while you're younger, and
No.
then you can.
That's literally the opposite of what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying to the young artists now that you've got to look at that what happens if that deal falls out. There's so many people that have a development deal, whatever. Look at maybe being the person that gives those development deals by the end of it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Toured all over the place, but I have never been down that particular route of this is my band, this is my act, chase the label thing. I'm talking from a working musician perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just slightly different world.
But what if you had, all that time you were writing and working with these bands, what if you had maybe, for every 10 tunes you made, you put 2 aside into a library and got started up a library agency, or started up some sort of
I do actually have music on my
Okay,
library
right.
already.
But, okay, good. So you had that covered. But there could have been something else you could have been doing on the, do you see what I'm saying? You could have been looking into buying a club, the venues that you were playing in. Maybe think, well, wonder what the lease is doing on this place.
The thing about the music industry generally,
Yeah.
that there isn't that same single path anymore. I think
No.
musicians have to be very clever about having multiple revenue streams.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
also, well, a lot of it's very speculative. Again, going back to
Of course.
the crypto sort of NFT concept, and I think it's about actually looking at what is concrete. You know, what we can actually do to actually use our skills, rather than getting necessarily distracted by certain avenues that are just using tech for tech's sake.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
From being creative.
I mean, there's a label, I can't remember the name of it, there's a label in France that started becoming a seamstress. And then they just decided to become a fashion house. But they had a, because they had a certain look and a certain style, they were able to sort of translate that into the fashion. And then they started doing fashion, and then they realized they made loads of money doing fashion, so they just started going back and doing the music again. Because they had the money to pay for the vinyl, to do all that stuff, to do their own distribution. The same thing with a label in Canada. They became a book publisher as well as a record label.
Really where, like,
Yeah.
creativity is almost sometimes now things have almost become about an aesthetic rather than you just do music.
Yeah.
You just do art. You're a content creator
Yeah.
as a whole, and it's often about that kind of having that sort of aesthetic or direction.
It's
to it,
just
you know.
unfortunate. I mean, I would love to go back. Look, I run the biggest drum and bass vinyl only market in the world, right? That's what Clashmouth is. And we do it twice a year. We have 2,000 people come at a time. And I'm seeing like 16-year-old kids thumbing through old jungle hymn. Nothing makes me happier. But the thing is that the majors are absolutely dominating the vinyl factories, for example. So most independent labels now can't produce vinyl. And there's been a vinyl drought, for example.
8-9 months waiting time.
Yeah,
Ice cream, that's what the supermarkets will try and do.
that's true.
They'll say, oh, I'll take all that for 50p a go.
Yeah.
Once they've got it all, they say, now I want it for 30p a go. And you've no other customers. So
Got no customers, yeah. And it's so hard. How do you resist Sainsbury's or, you know, Sony or, you know, it's hard to turn that business down. But this guy has recognised actually, we got to think outside the box here. He's just going to deal with only up to a certain amount. So I think it will really work for him because he'll have a constant stream of customers that will just keep him, keep him sorted. So yeah, I just think what my point is though is that I think the kids are way ahead of us in terms of thinking outside the box. I mean, I saw a video of a TikTok person doing one of the things and showing how she does the video, like with these crazy. Have you seen that video? So within the TikTok, and that's what I'm saying. That's my point in regards to who the big stars are now. We just won't necessarily know unless we have to go and look and really do research. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
so like BTK.
Oh yeah, I'm just all about really translating that back into music. You
100%, and some of them will.
Needing to find some quick gimmick that will go viral, then maybe lead people to their music.
But it's always the ones that aren't really meaning to be viral that are viral. That's the thing. It's like when it's too fake, those people always get found out.
Yeah, but
They always get seen. But anyway.
needs to be music. That's what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
why-
Oh no. I agree. But TikTok's just one platform. Like, you know, I mean, people maybe should support Tidal more. I think. But the problem is you have to be exclusive with them. But they pay 6 times more than Spotify. Like, but no one goes to them because they haven't got that many customers. But then I was saying, but doesn't that mean that you'll probably get seen more on their platform? So I'm considering it. It might, you know, and it's black owned. You know, if I'm being honest, like there's an argument there that I should be supporting. But I don't know. You know, that's a whole other argument.
I think this has been an amazing panel. Lots of different points of view and everything. Thanks so much for coming, and please do stick around for the music. We've got a gig for a couple of hours, and then we've got a club night after that. Lots of amazing artists, and we're going to try and sum it up just in a couple of words. I think Zak's going to butt in now, aren't you? You're going to say
no. I think everyone probably got some closing remarks. All mine is just firstly, Pat, to you. You know, fantastic. Thank you for getting us up for the panel, and fantastic for all the work you've been doing around Love Music, Hate Racism.
Thank you for everything you
Huddles.
do. Honestly,
I appreciate that. I just want to say, you know, in one sentence, really, I think today the challenges we face today are immense, but I think collective action is what's needed. You know, as individuals, we have a limited amount of power. When we act collectively, I saw that on the streets in London on Saturday of 10,000 people coming out for UN Anti-Racism Day, happening in cities across the world. I'm from that tradition of people who organise collectively and who fight back for a better world. So I hope my ending closing remark is continue to struggle together for a better society in Huddersfield and across the country.
Our collective history for me, and the book for me was a celebration about all of the things that we've done that those bastards try and deny that we ever did, and it belongs to all of us, and we should celebrate it and use it as a building block to do exactly as Chris says and move forward. And then, like witchcraft and the burning of witches, people will look back in 200 years and go, racism, what the fuck was that all about?
Yeah,
man?
that would be nice. Yeah, well done. Yeah, well
anything
done.
to add, Chris?
Yeah, so I thank you all. It's been really, really fascinating. It's been great to get to know you all. I guess my message is the same, really. Just you know, I hope we can all excel together. You know, that's kind of what I'm I don't know about you, Zak. I'm tired of struggling. But so I want to excel together, man. I want to drink some champagne and strawberries and cream and do you know what I mean? You know, I don't know.
Well, so thanks very much to the panellists, and thanks for coming. Cheers, Chris. We'll be kicking off with some music at 9 o'clock if you want to stick about.